Shine.fm presents Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Here's Seth Tower Hurd.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. My name is Seth Tower Hurd, joined by Dr. Karen Cassiday. You can check out more about what she's doing at momswithoutworry.com. And if you're listening on the radio, you can always go back and check out the video later because your dogs are just hanging out, so we just let them. So yes, there's a white German Shepherd who's just hanging out, just totally taking the petting right now, like just scratching under the chin. He's good to just hang.
Yes, and hopefully Chatch will not start snoring loudly. Yeah.
Okay.
She's our Springer Spaniel. Yeah. She's the chill one.
Yeah. They're happy, so we're just going to let him be on the radio with us. So this is a heavy show, just so you know. If you have young kids and you're listening on the air, or this is, you're watching the video, listening to the podcast, you can always hit pause. Or if you're listening on the air, you can go search Shine.fm on Facebook or YouTube, or search Shine.fm podcast to subscribe to the audio feed. Not the episode I wanted to do, but if we're going to talk about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community, we can't ignore the events of the last 3 weeks, which is that there have been 3 very notable Americans who have passed away, 2 definitely from suicide. 1 is kind of a question mark at this point. Anthony Bourdain, who was, the beloved food and travel show host, as well as the designer Kate Spade. And then there's a 20-year-old gentleman who's a sitcom actor that his name is escaping me at the moment. On top of all that, there's a kind of a hysteria around season 2 of a show called 13 Reasons Why on Netflix. And so there's all these touch points about self-harm and suicide in a way that can be kind of glorifying, which is why we're going to spend this show unpacking the healthy and Christian response to this. So first of all, Dr. Cassiday, so when this gets talked about so much in the media, my understanding is that a celebrity ending their life actually drives interest, and then the reverse is that what we're going to try to do here is that when people hear stories of somebody who has contemplated self-harm and moved on, that actually has the reverse effect, that interest in attempts in suicide actually go down. So the media has a big role to play here.
Yeah, and actually this is a great concern for the mental health community and the education community, because we know that if you have a family member, even a distant relative, that commits suicide, it exponentially drives up the risk that anyone related to them will do that. Or if you have a friend in school or someone in school who does that, and we don't attribute it to a copycat effect. What we attribute it to is it puts the idea in someone's mind that this is a possible solution to the agony that they feel. The other thing that we know, unfortunately, that's been happening is that the rates for youth suicide have tripled in the past 20 years. And very sadly, it's for all youth, 18 and under, it's become the second leading cause of death.
And for all Americans, it's now the 10th.
The number 10.
Cause.
Yes. Yes, and so the rates have been increasing, and this is very unfortunate because in the mental health community, we've been trying to increase awareness. But one of the things that we know promotes suicide is, first of all, having access to the means to commit suicide. And so if you have a gun in your home, you need to think about that very carefully, because 51% of all suicides that are committed and completed, a completed suicide is with a gun. Men are 4 times as likely. We know men are more likely to be gun owners. And so we see when there's fewer barriers to suicide, so there isn't a strong message from the culture saying suicide is not an option. When we know people who do it, that breaks down the barrier. And then when we have easy access, and then when we add in isolation and loneliness, so we see when people don't have good social support, or they feel they can't talk about it, or they can't tell someone, I'm at risk, or I'm thinking this way, then that increases their risk. And then the other thing, unfortunately, is alcohol. And we see that 75% of male youth suicides are when someone is intoxicated. And the other misconception about suicide is that depression is always the cause. what we see is there's a fair chunk of people who do it where it's a sudden decision. They have the means to do it. Oftentimes they're drunk or they're high or they're isolated and alone and they don't have someone else there that they can talk to or who notices they're in a bad way, and then the unfortunate thing happens. So it really is concerning. And then the other thing that's a problem is when we have shows like 13 Reasons, we see that shows people how to do it. And it shows that there's an option. And there's been a great deal of controversy because at the same time this show is validating people who feel suicidal and their need for help and intervention and the pressures they face that might drive them to suicide, it also makes it easier for other people to contemplate it and complete a suicide attempt.
This is Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. This is a heavy topic. If you're joining us on the radio, you can always go back and grab this later as a podcast or video if you got kids present, but we do feel that this must be addressed. I want to camp out for a moment on the popularity of this show, 13 Reasons Why, which from my understanding, it's tough to get a grasp of what's going on with Netflix because they really don't tell you who's watching what, but circumstantial evidence shows that this may be the most popular show for teenagers in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I have observed and talked to parents about is that their kids are maybe, even if they're like, you're not watching this, and the good thing about Netflix is you know what your kid watched because there's a record. They're watching at a friend's house, something like that. And this is definitely, I do some work as a film and TV critic for Relevant Magazine. I think it's a terrible show just as far as the quality of TV shows, period. And the message is just absolutely horrible. So if your kid has seen it or has questions, can we hang out there for a minute? How do you talk about it?
Well, I think the first thing that parents need to do that we know is very effective is to let your kid know that suicide's not an option, that their life is precious, that God has a purpose for them, and even if they can't see it or feel it, there's hope. And that their life is going somewhere and there's always a bigger plan. And that message has to be front and center. Because we see when kids are in late elementary school and those tween years and those adolescent and young adult years, that can be incredibly difficult for that time for them. The other thing is we know that when parents get their kids to think and become thoughtful, they're better able to inoculate them against cultural influences that are unhelpful. And so instead of leading the conversation with, I can't believe you're watching that show, or why did you succumb to peer pressure, or what's wrong with you? You need to ask, how come you watched it? What made you interested? What do you think about what happened? What do you think about, the central character's choice to kill herself? And people's reaction to it, and to try and help your child think through. Because one of the things that we know keeps people alive is when they realize the choice to kill myself leaves devastation for others, and it doesn't solve a problem, it just ends my life. It's not a solution, it's not anesthesia, it's just killing myself. And helping them think through that process and realize that if I kill myself, I'm going to make my siblings more likely to kill themselves. I'm going to make my parents more likely to divorce and kill themselves. I'm going to make my cousins more likely. And in fact, as a therapist, when I have someone who's contemplating that, we share this information. We do anything we can to create barriers. If someone is a person of faith, then we tell them God gave you life for a purpose, and it's not your job to prematurely end it.
Yeah.
It's your job to be here, and that God is with you in your suffering, and He's redeeming every moment of it. So that's one thing, is to ask those open-ended questions that generate thoughtfulness, and then to even ask them the question that every parent's afraid to ask: have you ever felt like killing yourself? And what we see is, unfortunately, many youth have thought of this. And one of the things I see parents doing is they think that if they have a good relationship with their child, it's going to protect them against suicide and mental health problems. And although that may have a protective effect, we know that generally kids know what their parents don't want to hear, and they avoid talking about it. And so you need to give them the approach and the understanding that I realize you could have such bad days you might want to end your life. And when you invite them to talk about that and to not wig out, but to show calmness and compassion and to understand what it really means is I'm stuck, I'm trapped, I don't know what to do, and so I'm thinking about this thought. You make it possible for them to think other thoughts and to feel deeply understood so that they are not alone and this isn't an option. The other thing I tell parents to do is tell your kids the following. I love you, and I never want you to die or hurt yourself. And if you were to do that, it would ruin my life forever, because the biggest gift in my life was your life. And that helps create a barrier. And that's hard for parents to say, because I know as I'm saying that and think about my son, it gives me teary eyes.
Yeah.
And it's because no parent wants to ever hear this from their kid. No one wants to think about this. And the same thing, if you have a spouse who's suffering with this, you need to let them know your life is so precious to me that I need you to struggle through this, and I'm here with you. I am with you through the pain, and there is going to be an end to this suffering. And then the other thing is you've got to be open to getting help, because one of the things that we see is that when we look at young adults, we see that at least 60% of them have thoughts of wanting to end their life. So 60%, when we look at the college population, we realize not 60% doesn't kill themselves, but in other words, this has become part of our culture. And they think of self-injury in a way that 20, 30 years ago, this thought just wasn't there. And so you have to accept that, and you have to realize that could be going on in someone's mind. The good news is, in terms of risk, if someone does not attempt a suicide within a year of having, or within the first year, then we know their risk is drastically lower than someone during that first year. And so as a spouse, as a parent, as a friend, someone in your men's group, your women's group, if someone starts having these for the first time, that's when we have to take action and take it seriously and realize this person needs our love and our support and our affirmation of the value and purpose of their life. And that we need to say for them what they can't say to themselves. And we need to do what Jesus did for us, which is to say, you are loved. You have a purpose. There's something much bigger here in your life than you ever have any understanding of at any one moment. And I called you and named you and claimed you, and you belong to my family. And we have to say that to our fellow Christians, our family members, that you belong, you're one of us, and I'm not going to let you go easily.
Dr. Karen Cassiday joins us on Stronger Together. It's a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community. This is a very heavy, very serious show. If you're catching it on the radio, you can always grab it later if you'd rather listen without younger kids present. Search Shine.fm podcast or Shine.fm on Facebook or YouTube. But I'm learning a ton here. I think we all are, that if you help somebody get through the first year, that, and then the other thing is that should absolutely, I think, wake all of us up that look around at the college students or, kind of post-college age,
Yes.
And it's over half.
Yes. And the other alarming thing is, just to put this in perspective, if we have 3 youth, so 3 people under 18 in a geographical region that commit suicide, we consider that an epidemic, and we know that it's going to predict that other kids in that area are going to kill themselves. And we see children at a younger age thinking about suicide and completing it. So in the Chicago region a couple of years ago, we had 2 5th graders who committed suicide, and that was unheard of 20 or 30 years ago. I can't think of ever having heard of that, and now this is very sadly more common. And so don't make the assumption that you have to be an adolescent. I think for all of us, when we see someone getting isolated, we know that's a big risk factor, and that one of the more protective things that you can have in life is dear friends. And we see that if kids have at least one good friend, that is a huge buffer between themselves and thinking about suicide or attempting it or completing it. And so if your kids don't have friends, or if you don't have friends, you think all you need is work and your work buddies, or you think all you need to do is be with the kids and hang out with them, and you're not really bearing your soul at women's group or men's group, I would challenge you to rethink that and realize the thing that we all deeply need is to be known, not just by God, but by fellow human beings. And deep intimacy means someone knows who you really are, all your good things, all your bad things, and they accept you for that, and they call out your gifts, and they help you manage your limitations. And so you're congruent. You know who you are, they know who you are, and you're accepted. And our kids need that from us. And that brings up the thing that happens that we think is one of the things that may be playing into the cultures, besides all this media about how to kill yourself, TV shows that, glorify it and show it as an option. We see that, I just lost my train of thought. Help me out.
The 13 Reasons Why?
Yeah, 13 Reasons. Yeah, that we see that that what you need to do is to rethink how you are as a human being and the message you're giving to your kid. And so we don't want to teach them, you got to be special, you got to be happy, because we see that actually makes kids feel more isolated and alone, and that they can't talk to their family. Or if a wife or a husband believes, you want me to be happy, but right now I'm not because it's hard because the kids are little, or it's hard because my job is difficult, or whatever, then you just enhance their isolation. And a better message to give to people is sometimes you're having a very difficult life, and that's normal, and it's very painful, and that's okay. That's just the way it is. Sometimes we have those desert experiences, and that's a normal part of life. And we see that helps to protect adults and children when they start embracing the difficulties of life as being normal and knowing it's okay if I'm in pain. One of the things that we're seeing now is we're seeing kids that you would never ever predict, or young adults that you would never ever predict, kill themselves where they look like they have all the wonderful things. And sadly, Kate Spade and Anthony Bourdain portrayed this.
Yeah, if we can kind of hang out there for a second.
Yeah.
Anthony Bourdain in particular was someone who, beyond just being on a television show, had a lot of, notable friends, and I've heard on multiple podcasts and stuff that they just hung out with him, that he said this was the best year of his life. He was doing wonderfully, and I had talked previously about beating his addictions, that he'd been a pretty severe drug addict in his 20s and 30s and never expected to live for more than a couple years past where he was at. He got through that. He was a father. He was a beloved television host, and for every outside marker, it looked like he was doing great, and then he just wasn't with us anymore.
Yeah, and the same thing with Kate Spade. She had a 13-year-old little girl that she loved dearly, and one of the most successful brands in women's businesses and accessories and whatever. And and I'd say as a Christian, we know one of the things it illustrates that's obvious, which is material things and worldly success doesn't make you happy or give you all the things that you hope it's going to give you. But I think what it does illustrate is that all of us can have secret pains and difficulties that we need to address, and that we need to feel like we're part of a community. And this is one of the saddest things that I work with, is when I have a family where someone's killed themselves and we didn't expect it. They weren't in treatment, there weren't any obvious signs. And helping them accept that terrible loss, because everybody's like, should I have seen it coming? And the truth is, we need to learn how to live authentic lives as Christians, where we're open about the struggles, we can celebrate the success, but also we can accept that we are all broken people who need each other all the time, and we really are going to have some deep struggles. And And it's not enough to just tell someone, I'm going to pray for you. Sometimes it means you need to be asking those questions you're afraid to ask, which is, how bad is it getting? Have you ever wondered about whether or not you should be alive? Have you ever thought about killing yourself or hurting yourself? And what we know from research is that when you ask those questions, you validate someone's experience and you release them and you help them feel connected back to you again. And like they're understood deeply and they belong. And the most mistaken perception I see is that people are afraid to say the word suicide or to ask about it. And it's seen as a taboo. And then that creates problems. And people feel like they can't go to their parents, to their teachers, to other people and say, I don't know why I'm alive. I don't know what the point is. I can't take the pain anymore. I need your help.
We're with Dr. Karen Cassiday. This is obviously, if you're just joining us and you're listening to this on the radio, you can always go back, grab this as a podcast or YouTube or Facebook video later if you'd rather listen to this on your own without young kids present, as this is a topic that absolutely must be addressed, but also may not be appropriate for kids particularly under like 13, 14 years old. You just mentioned that suicide is the second leading cause of death of people under 18.
Yes,
that's correct.
Yes.
So let's talk about what happens if God forbid that it is another person at your church or your school or your neighborhood that a kid successful ends their life. You got to talk to your kids about that.
Yes.
And this is one of the most significant things that they will have been through, seen in their young lives. Where do you start on that?
I think the first thing you have to do is to acknowledge that a suicide happened and to avoid the euphemisms that people use or to try and not talk about it. Because that's the thing I see most families doing is they're afraid to admit that or say that. And so you need to be open. And then also you need to be open about what you know or don't know. The majority of people who kill themselves don't leave a note or any message or give a particular warning. And so quite frankly, the people left behind are extremely puzzled and feeling guilty. And your child may feel guilty if it's a friend that they knew in their youth group or their school. And you need to let them know, number one, it wasn't their choice. This person made this mistake, and they didn't know how to cope with their pain at that moment, and it's very sad. And you want to ask your kid, how do you feel about it? What do you think about it? What are you feeling and thinking? And so the thing would be to draw them out to be able to talk and to realize they can say the word suicide. They can talk to you about it. And then the other thing I would put out a pitch is a support for the family, because we see that when people have victims of crime or suicide, they're the ones most likely to be abandoned after the funeral or at the funeral, because people feel like it's unmentionable and they feel like, I don't know how to talk about it. So what do you say to that mother or that father who lost their child or lost a sister or brother to suicide? And you need to be willing to say, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Are you having trouble with blaming yourself? And to reassure them that the responsibility, it wasn't their choice to do this, and there is no woulda, coulda, shoulda, and that it's tragic, and to accept that uncertainty. And I think that's one reason we get so anxious about this topic, is because there's so much uncertainty about why it happened, why then, and people go back in their head. And in fact, therapists feel this way, except we're fortunate to get a lot of training on how to deal with this, because of course that happens to us too, that we don't have the perfect therapy, and we lose, patients to suicide. And so the idea is talk about it and try to do it in a matter-of-fact way, the same way you would if someone else died, because we know how to talk about cancer now. That used to be unmentionable. We know how to talk about if grandma or grandpa died because their heart couldn't work anymore. One way you can explain it to younger children is to say, this person forgot that their life really mattered, and they didn't know how to manage their pain and their confusion about why they should continue living. And so they accidentally ended their life. And they may have done it on purpose, but they didn't understand at that moment that it was a mistake. And so you're trying to help your child understand there's a different choice, that this was a moment of, very bad judgment, insanity, being high or being drunk, although I wouldn't go into those details with younger children because we know people quite often are drunk or high when this happens. And so we want to help them understand that the person did this, that that they were disturbed when they were doing it isn't the way that people normally think. And all mental health professionals consider the choice to kill yourself as an unreasonable choice. And as Christians, we know it's an unreasonable choice.
Yeah. With Dr. Karen Cassiday, obviously this is heavy. You can always go back and grab this as a podcast or YouTube video later. The show is called Stronger Together. Search Shine.fm, Facebook, YouTube, or wherever you download podcasts. I do just want to wrap up our time here talking about there's been so much talk about ending the stigma around getting help, therapy, counseling, that type of thing.
Yes.
And yet, unfortunately, I think that sometimes Christian circles can be one of the reasons people don't seek help. I actually heard somebody in a Sunday school class one time say, if you're depressed, it's because you don't have enough faith. And I was quite upset. But that message gets out there sometimes, like, well, isn't Jesus enough? Why can't you just try harder and not bother me with this? Obviously you're a committed Christian. Full disclosure, we do go to church together. How can you speak to that? As somebody who's been in both worlds for your whole adult life, mental health and faith.
Right. Well, I think the first thing that we have to remember is that perhaps it would be a reasonable assumption to say if someone had an extremely mature, well-developed faith where they've had lots of experiences of struggling and deep pain and learning to turn to God, that maybe they have resilience against this. But the truth is, we're all on a journey, and our faiths are immature, just like our mental health may be, or our social skills, and we have to accept that. And that for many people, it's very invalidating if they're suffering deeply and you tell them you need to pray more, or here, read these scriptures, when what they really need is someone that they can pour their heart out to. They may need medication. They may need help with substance abuse. They may need help with relationships. They might be abused. They might have experienced a trauma and have such intense shame that they can't imagine why they should live. And in that instance, they need mental health care. And I would advocate always praying for someone, but they need specific help to help with their specific problem. And so I would recommend being open-minded. And we found the best thing you can do if you think someone's having trouble is to encourage them to speak to someone who has mental health experience. And we have the National Suicide Hotline that is staffed with well-trained people that you can reach on Siri and now on Android. So if you just simply say suicide in a message out loud, it will automatically contact you to the National Suicide Hotline.
Wow.
And so you can let kids know that. If you need to talk to someone instantly, your smartphone will get you to that. And we also have a national hotline by text because we see younger adults where there's a live person. And so if you typed that in, it will hook you up to someone. And so my encouragement would be, that's one quick way where those people are trained to counsel in the crisis, to hook someone up with resources, to help them get the things that they need if you feel like you don't know what to do, or all you really do have to offer is prayer.
Yeah. I'm going to make this comparison. I played college basketball briefly, which ended when I wound up breaking my femur, which is the most horrific pain I've ever experienced in my life. Oh. And I was rushed to the hospital. And I look back at that, and nobody at church told me to just walk on it and it'd be fine.
Yes.
Yeah. Skip the pain meds. Like just have enough faith, and your the longest bone in your body will heal up. It'll be fine. And unfortunately, that's sometimes the attitude we've had towards mental health is just walk it off. It's not a big deal. But that could not be further from the truth. And particularly in times like this, where this topic is top of mind, we need to get people who need help into professional help.
Right. And one thing I can tell parents is if you go to childmind.org, they have great articles of what to say to kids in different age groups, where if you need specific sort of wording to help you talk to your child about it, where you suspect they're suicidal, or to talk to them after they've seen or heard about a suicide, then you can do that. And then the other thing we know is that these days school personnel in the guidance department are trained in this because we do have a national epidemic. And so tell someone at school, tell an adult. And schools know how to mobilize now. They all have crisis management teams for this. And so, my recommendation would be churches should have this too, where this is part of their protocol. Where when someone says this, then the pastoral team and everyone knows, okay, how can we really support this person and funnel them into the right resources that show them they belong, their life is precious, help is on the way, your pain is not infinite and overwhelming. We're going to give you emotional pain relief, spiritual pain relief, or chronic pain relief, because we see people with severe chronic pain are at increased risk for suicide attempts and completions. But to take an active approach rather than I'm afraid to say something because I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I'm afraid if I say the word, I'm going to make people do it. We see that when someone's feeling suicidal, they're less likely when someone validates their feeling that way and is willing to listen and talk to them about it as opposed to skirting the issue.
And I actually think that that's maybe the place where this becomes actionable for a lot of people who don't have to be worried about this right now. You might be saying, I don't have kids at the moment, or my kids are 2 and 4, so this doesn't apply, or my kids are, out of the house. And it may be that you got all the way to here because you need to be the person who talks to somebody at your church to say, how are we going to have a plan for this thing?
Yes.
Particularly when there's so much going on in culture. Dr. Karen Cassiday, you can check out more of her work at momswithoutworry.com. I know this has not been a fun episode of Stronger Together, but if we're going to be a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationship, and community, we absolutely have to give you what you need so that you can be an informed and compassionate person for your own family, your friend group, your church, and people like that you can be have never been more needed than right now. I am going to put you on the spot. The best way to get a hold of you, we can also put in the show notes of the podcast. If churches actually do want to contact you about getting a program together and having a plan.
Yeah, you can call my 1-800 number, which is 877-559-001, and I'd be glad to help any pastoral team or youth group leader, Sunday school director help put together a plan or get you to the resources where you can do that for your congregation.
Once again, Dr. Karen Cassiday joins me. We've talked about the positive steps that you can take at a time when discussion and attempts at suicide are at a very high level in American culture at the moment. If you missed any part of this conversation, you can grab the entire thing as a video by searching Shine.fm on Facebook or YouTube, or search Shine.fm podcasts wherever you subscribe to audio. Once again, you can find out more about Dr. Cassiday's work generally at momswithoutworry.com, which is an episode that we'll probably do coming up here in the fall. This is Shine.fm.
That was Stronger Together, a show about growing in marriage, parenting, relationships, and community. Subscribe to the Shine.fm podcast to catch every episode of Stronger Together, available on the iTunes podcast app and wherever podcasts are available.